Namaste and welcome to AuroTalks series. And my guest today is Dr. Chhalamayi Reddy, who is
Namaste.
who is the principal of Sri Aurobindo International School, Hyderabad, and a former student of Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, Pondicherry, and Pondicherry University, where she completed her PhD in Sri Aurobindo's poetry. So, welcome, Dr. Chhalamayi Reddy. We are happy to have you here with your rich experience of being in education field for such a long time, of teaching, training, being principal and administration everywhere, and you've attended so many conferences. You have written so many papers on Sri Aurobindo's and Mother's way of education. And this time that we invited different scholars to compare Sri Aurobindo with various scholars across the world. So you have chosen Rudolf Steiner. And it's very interesting to see the background of both the visionaries, Rudolf Steiner and Sri Aurobindo. So we would like you to start by telling us what interested you to choose Rudolf Steiner, his theory of education or his vision of education, and compare it with Sri Aurobindo.
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, SACAR, for giving me this opportunity to share a few thoughts of my reading of Rudolf Steiner and Sri Aurobindo. Yes, at the outset, I would like to share the fact that first thing, what interested me to take up the topic of Rudolf Steiner is because he's an educationist, apart from being considered a philosopher and a scientist, and also have worked in the field of medicine, agriculture, architecture. So he's a very versatile personality. But I have been particularly interested in the Waldorf schools, and the author of these schools, of course, the founder is Rudolf Steiner, and I felt that long back I had visited a Waldorf school and I had read about Rudolf Steiner's philosophy, but I did not delve very deep into it, and I wasn't very focused when I read him in the past. So I took upon myself to take this opportunity to really read him a little more in depth, because Rudolf Steiner has written his articles in German, and so most of what we can read of him is only through his translations.
Yes, and he's written a lot, and it's so much in line. The name of his books also are so much in tune with Sri Aurobindo's that it is amazing to see how his ideas of evolution on education, on child education, and even education for the disabled or specially able. He has worked on it quite a bit. So it is very interesting, and even in your paper, the way you have theme-wise, you have compared Sri Aurobindo and Steiner's theory, and it's very interesting to know that they were almost contemporary. Steiner was about a decade.
Yes, just about 10 years of difference in the date of birth. Yes.
So, in fact, we've had a previous interview of Maria Montessori, of which you have mentioned in your paper also. So all three of them are contemporary, and they have had similar ideas on education, which is extremely fascinating. So,
Yes, I found it very, very interesting and very, kind of, it's very providential to see that they were, all three just hardly with a few years gap. Their thoughts really met, and they had a common vision of what education is about. So yes, that's why I found it, and I'm very happy that I have selected Rudolf Steiner, because I was quite amazed at the similarities that we find in his educational vision compared to Sri Aurobindo's as well. Yes.
So, in the very first introductory portion of your paper, you mentioned that his theory is, or his concept of education, or his writings are based on what he developed as anthroposophy. So, can you explain to us in terms of Steiner, what is the meaning of anthroposophy?
Firstly, according to Steiner, he interestingly, he kind of clubbed both the words spirituality and science. So he, according to him, anthroposophy is basically a spiritual science. So we will not generally consider spirituality to have anything to do with science. But Steiner was very particular in trying to make us to understand that it's a spiritual philosophy, but the fact that it is not something abstract, it is not something which is not connected with the common, commoner in relation to that to his life. According to him, in fact, it was the whole concept of his spirituality is a conscious awareness of humanity. So the, as he called it, the spiritual element, the humanity within every individual, how it kind of blossoms and kind of unfolds its essential spiritual potential is what uh, the whole anthroposophy process is about. So that is what, according to him, uh, the anthroposophy meant. And basically, it's a scientific exploration of spirituality, the growth of spirituality in a human being. So we see very interesting ways, and I think the science part of it applies because his whole description of the process is pretty structured. It's pretty, kind of methodic and rational and very kind of it takes a certain sequence, a certain procedure. So in that sense, there is a certain structure to his whole concept of spiritual growth in a child.
Okay. In case if you can throw any light on why is it that anthroposophy was called something like I think the elitist philosophy or a discriminative philosophy, something like that. I mean,
Well, it must have been because, as I said, firstly, it's not considered a religion because I think Rudolf Steiner must have felt that the moment it is not in terms of a rigidity that we need to follow it. We need to understand it more in terms of its intellectual, implications. I guess the person why it probably was referred as elitist was because people of intellectual ability would understand what he's trying to convey. And for the commoner, they would find it difficult, to understand this whole very intangible, abstract process that he's speaking about in the growth of a child.
so when he was writing, was this idea was a new idea in Europe? Is it like that a human being is a composite of so many levels, and the education has to proceed in this manner, the way Steiner has written? Because Freud had already come by then, and perhaps people were exposed to the idea that we are multiple beings, whatever his theory might be. But do you think it was a novel idea then in Europe, European education
I
system?
don't think so. With what I have read in the of the works of the essays and articles of what Rudolf Steiner has said, in fact, he has not mentioned Freud at all. So I don't think he drew any kind of his source was not Freud. His source was very much Goethe and Emerson and Nietzsche. So it was more in that line that his thought has developed rather than on the lines of the Freudian concept of human individual.
Nice.
So I think it is quite new at that point of time to kind of view a human being as a complex personality of the physical, emotional, mental kind of framework that we see in Sri Aurobindo also.
Right. Yeah. You have in your paper explained how the physical, the body, as in terms of Sri Aurobindo and Steiner, and the vital in terms of what Sri Aurobindo calls and what Steiner says. But here in one of the lines you mentioned, the physical body is described as having the same laws which are at work in the same substance in the mineral world as well. Can you explain this a little?
This is what Steiner says that the essential functioning of a physical body would align itself to, I mean, would match the kind of functioning which is happening in matter in a sense, where unless it is informed with life, it would have a kind of, I guess, what I understood is a kind of a mechanical procedure to it. So unless it is inhabited by the second, kind of level that he speaks about, which is the vital force. So in that sense, there is a commonality between um, um, you know, the matter and the human body in a sense, but without the part of the life informed in it, already becoming part of that. Yeah.
So basically, it's inert matter or it's ignorant
Enough,
matter,
enough.
inconscient
Yes,
matter that.
yes, yes, yes. So there is
All,
a process of growth, um, but I think in the human body, and that's where we come to a second explanation about how the etheric, kind of body takes over, the life body as he calls it, and then it is informed with life. So the whole growth process of growth is different there.
okay. Then he also speaks of, I mean, you have written that the physical body may be spoken as an image or expression of the life body. So this is what you mean when you say that the prana or the life has
Yes,
come into the inert
yes,
matter. Right?
yes. This is what Steiner said. So it's a direct quote from him, where he says that uh, the form of the force, of the life force, is the body. So the body becomes an expression of that life force.
Okay.
So that is very interesting to observe what he says, because uh, otherwise it seems as if then he doesn't attribute it uh, to anything which is living. So the force, the energy, the life force itself takes the form of the body in that sense. So it's a very
Mhm.
close knit and connected kind of two aspects
So
of the human.
it's, can we say it is similar to what Sri Aurobindo says, that there has to be the call from below and something that occupies that lower or integrates itself with the lower so that it can upgrade itself or it can evolve.
Yes, it's very interesting. As we go along, and probably in our conversation, I'll try to probably bring in that aspect of how Steiner also speaks about the higher, inversely starting manifesting itself from top down.
Okay.
Yes, we can
Okay.
understand this as part of that. Yeah.
Okay. Like what Sri Aurobindo has used in his explanations about human consciousness and levels of human, the beings that we have, he's used the physical, vital, mental, and here Steiner uses etheric body, life body, and then later on he also speaks about the I. So of course the I has, as I read in your this thing, it starts with something, and then the definitions that Steiner has given is they are much larger and broader. But when he is equating this I or ego, human I or ego, so there's a quote that you cited here. It is the vehicle of the human I or ego. The vehicle of this faculty of saying I of the I faculty is the body of the I, the fourth member of the human being. So can you elaborate on this, the human I that he talks about?
Yes, I found that concept of I very interesting, but a little confusing, because Steiner speaks about I as the body of the ego, or he speaks about the body of the I, and he's saying that uh, he, the way he explains it later, he speaks about it as if it is a God element in the human being. But the description of it is a little confusing, and it's like a misnomer in terms of what he wants to convey. Because there is these terms of the I, there is this term of the ego, and then he attributes it to a godlike quality which informs all the other domains and enables them to evolve. So it is a little bit confusing, but uh, there are close. Uh, I can say that a lot of what he's trying to convey has parallels in what Aurobindo is trying to say in terms of what I constitutes in relation to its qualities, in relation to its characteristics, I should say. And I would like to explain this further. Very interestingly, he starts talking about, firstly, he says it is that element of the body of the eye, which the way I understand it is awareness of one's deeper self, if I can say so. Um, and that is what gives the quality, or it enables a human being to evolve into higher levels of consciousness. He kind of says, it describes it very interestingly in an inverse manner. What do I understand by this? How do we explain this is that he starts by talking about how it operates in the sentient body. And for our understanding, the sentient body is more the mental domain of what Sri Aurobindo speaks about. In that domain, once it lightens up, as he says, when it kind of becomes, I think that element that he speaks about becomes uh, more functional, and starts kind of, influencing the sentient body. Then he says that that element of the eye, he likens it to something which he calls a spirit, the manas in Indian terminology, and what he calls it the spirit self. So he likens to that center of the sentient being to be manas, or the spirit self. And then he continues it to, he continues his description to go further down into the second domain, which is the etheric uh, being and the life body, where interestingly that he says how that higher sense of the eye, or the godlike element of what he describes, once it informs the etheric body and or the life body, it starts influencing and transforming the very character of a person. So that is something very interesting to note. And then that, according to him, becomes the intellectual soul. So the center of the etheric being is the intellectual soul. So it is the same element which he is phrasing differently in different levels. So he starts with this spirit self, then he talks about what you call the
Intellectual self.
spirit self. Instead of that, he calls it the sentient soul also. Then he calls it the intellectual soul. And down further, this is one of the most amazing points that I came across Rudolf Steiner, where he says that that same element, once it enters into the physical being, it actually, he says, that becomes Atma.
Oh.
So he
He
uses the word
word.
Atma. Yeah. In the second level, actually is calling the intellectual soul as Buddhi. In the sentient level, he calls it Manas. So it is in a way inverse. So Manas is the regular thinking mind. Buddhi is the more intelligent and the enlightened mind. And then the whole effect changes when it completely transforms itself, according to him, into the Atman element. You see? And that he calls the spiritual soul. And what is very amazing is he speaks about the transformation of the human body. The possibilities of the very, nature, the biological, component of the body starts undergoing a change. So, of course, he doesn't go into details, he leaves it at that. But it is very amazing to see how that thought of physical transformation also, was something that he thought about and he mentioned about it. So, this is very, very interesting.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and he's borrowed a lot of Indian terminology. So he was very much perhaps aware of the Panchakoshas and those kind of things. And that is why, whichever the way he tried to define it out, especially for the Western audience, he has chosen, as you rightly mentioned, Buddhi, Atma, and all these kind of. So he was aware that Indian systems, Vedantic systems especially, have given these, and maybe even Sankhya if he has used it at all. But Sankhya doesn't use Atma, but other things wherever he has borrowed a lot of this Indian. So there is this India connect over there
Yes, yes, he admits that completely, and as I've said in my article, he very he has expressed that he believed in this whole concept of karma and rebirth, and as I said in his connect first with inspiration from Goethe, then Nietzsche, and then he kind of worked in a setup where he came across the books of Nietzsche through Nietzsche's own sister, and
Mm-hmm.
then the poetry of Emerson, and there were a lot of things to do with, I'm sure, with the Indian Vedantic thought. And he very much believed in the manner in which he has explained of how this process of evolution happens. Unless he kind of admits the whole process of rebirth, that somewhere his whole theory of anthroposophy may not stand by itself. So he very much believed in that whole concept of rebirth. It's very interesting to find that. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's true. So, moving forward, if it's possible for you to give us a comparative picture of Sri Aurobindo's and Steiner's method or way of educating a child from birth, because Sri Aurobindo and the mother also speak about, the education even in the womb. And Steiner also speaks about, at least from zero, from birth zero to age 6, what should we do. So, as you rightly mentioned in your paper, it's more structured. But there are a lot of similarities of the stages of development of a child when the mind develops, the senses develops, etc. So, if you can just share with this with our audience who may like to read the book later on, but if you can throw some light on it.
Yes, we can draw a lot of similarities between Sri Aurobindo and Rudolf Steiner in the manner in which they speak about the different domains and how a child can grow and evolve in relation to all these different phases. Begin with, yes, Rudolf Steiner also speaks a lot about how important it is to be able to understand, how the child is at the very embryonic level, in the womb of the mother, and how that kind of has an influence or impacts the birth of the child and the growth of the child. And so that aspect is something which he pays a lot of attention to. And then there is something which he calls as a physical growth. But in the relation to the physical growth, he speaks about how the environment is very, very important. What kind of environment we create for the child to be able to grow in a healthy manner, in a beautiful manner, in a manner in which the spiritual unfoldment takes place in the child. So that is again something we find very similar to what Aurobindo and the mother have spoken about. Raising children in a very, the environment,
Conducive.
psychological, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual environment, how that has to be, designed in a manner where the spiritual unfoldment of the child takes place. And in the first part, he explains how the child learns through imitation, and that is of course something which is common to many educationists. They speak. He speaks about how they will grow in terms of what they see around them. Okay, and that, but in that part, what he is also talking about is how the second stage is also, is part of that physical growth, which is the etheric body. He says is contained in this physical growth. Hence, how the etheric growth also will be influenced by the manner in which the physical development is happening. And then he goes on to the etheric one, where he's speaking about how the child's emotional being is something which slowly starts blossoming and unfolding. And this is also what we see in Aurobindo and the mother, in terms of the concept of how in the vital education the development of the senses takes place, and then the whole how to address the development of the character, and that is what the mother speaks about as the two components of the vital education. And Steiner speaks about similarly in terms of trying to say that uh, in this period, in the etheric, period of the between around 8 to 12, so that is the physical age that he speaks about, he mentions, he's saying how the children should be exposed to parables,
Mm-hmm.
rather than something very uh, rational, or the intellectual explanation should be avoided, and children should be inspired through narratives.
Mm-hmm.
So how that will influence their, their etheric being, rather than trying to fast forward the process of the mental development in the child. So that is something very beautiful, and I really, kind of enjoyed reading that part. And we see so many things which are so common to what the mother has been saying, of how to, actually inspire them, how the inspiration should be something which becomes a propelling, kind of power for the child to grow in nature and character. And then the child can begin to understand it on a mental level of what it means, on a rational level. And that's exactly what Rudolf Steiner says. The whole methodology and the curriculum of teaching which should take place for in the growth of the child, it should, that intellectual and the rational part should come only after the etheric growth is complete, and then the sentient body, when that starts developing in the stage of puberty, then the real understanding on a rational and scientific level should be introduced to the child. So then it doesn't interfere with with the uh, I should say the blossoming, the complete blossoming of the emotional being in the child. So these are very similar things. We're talking of physical development, we are talking of vital development, we are talking of the mental development. Of course, all of them are together, but there is a sense of what we have to pay more attention to. And I believe in Waldorf schools, he has a very clear-cut plan written out for each level in terms of what to be done, as far as, how do we kind of unfold and roll out the curriculum, what should be the syllabus, so that these components are fully developed at every age.
So, in your experience of having visited the Waldorf school or having read Steiner, do you think it is a very compartmentalized, like at least little bit that I read, partly from your paper or other readings? I felt that he has given this very specific stage-wise, making of the child, the education of the child. Whereas, especially vital education, maybe sensorial you can give at a particular age, maybe, and especially this building of the character. And one very interesting thing that you mentioned in your paper is that the child, when he does this hero worship, when he admires the stories, the narratives that he's told about, he develops an objective view of the world. He doesn't, and he has to be taught that he cannot take sides. He cannot, side with anyone. Just learn to be objective. So, in your experience of years of teaching and in the light of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, do you think at such a tender age, this faculty can be developed or is developed?
Shruti, what you are saying, there are multiple things in this. One is that yes, he has, well, I don't know, because as I said, he also was a scientist. He came across, I mean, he described things in a very systematic manner, and he spoke about it in terms of, a very clear cut break in the age also. So he spoke about from which age to which age this has to be done, and how the other has to follow. But when you're talking about the sensorial development, yes, he does believe that it has to start initially in the very early stages of the child's growth, physical growth, which I think the mother also is particular about. But when you're, the second part of the question that you're asking is how do we, I mean, is it that you are asking me how the child can be, is it too early for the child to be influenced on the emotional level? Is that what you're
I mean, the
asking?
discriminatory faculty would not have developed, even though there is the child is listening to a lot of stories and he starts hero worshipping. Hero worshipping itself might be a kind of a judgment passed by the student, maybe the child, maybe. But at the same time, when Steiner expects the child or the teacher to ensure that there is no bias in his understanding or there is an objectivity in understanding, so that is also a kind of a discriminative faculty which develops after the age of 12 or 14. So in that stage of vital development, according to Steiner, the development of the vital. So is it, I mean, since you have so much of experience with children, I just was curious to know if that is possible, because, I mean, can children be unbiased, or can we teach them to be unbiased at such a small age?
Actually, Steiner speaks about something which the phrase is a spirit of emulation of this in the soul.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think he's talking about an objectivity. He's talking about how the soul can be, kind of inspired and directed towards a growth uh, which is able to manifest divine qualities in relation to the narration that the child has heard. So it is more in terms of being able to connect on a higher emotional level rather than really having the ability to discriminate. It is not a discrimination which Steiner is talking about. It is rather the importance of the parables, the use of parables in the narratives, that he says that let the child be exposed to parables instead of reality in a scientific way. So the parables are symbols, right? So the parables are some kind of symbols in which reality is being, kind of can be understood. So very interestingly, I think I would agree with Steiner, because yes, in my experience, I've seen that what would mold a child's emotional being, or extending it to saying that even instill values in him, shape his character, is something which touches him on the soul level, on an emotional level, and higher than that on the soul level. So that emulation of the soul is something where, because I think the child, there is a kind of a connect between what the child is listening to the narration of that soul quality, which harmonizes itself with the soul, his own soul quality. So there is a bridge which is, kind of created there, and that's the manner in which the child is, I think, is inspired as a person.
Okay.
He may not understanding it on a mental level, which is supposed to understand it later. So trying to give the explanation morally on a rational level, it is far better and it has a greater impact and influence if the child is made to understand through a certain imagery, an imagery of a parable, the narration of a parable, so and stories is something which all the children love. We all love to listen, and through listening to that narrative, there is, I think, a whole process, rolled out, set forth for the child's change to happen, because there is a connection, there's a bridge made between those soul qualities and the qualities, divine qualities in himself and herself.
Okay, so there is no need for the intervention of mind over there. It's like an imbibing of
Yes,
those
yes.
qualities.
In fact, he kind of insists that we don't bring in that element too much, and we see that happening in the regular English education or the Macaulayan education at present. That the rational or the academic, the cognitive part of academics is brought in too early in too much of an aggressive manner, without the imagination. What I would see here is what Sri Aurobindo gave a lot of importance in terms of the development of the faculty of imagination, and that is what, as a term itself, Rudolf uses, that let the imagination of the child be, developed in this stage of the etheric body growth, in the middle. So that is what it is set free, and it is really set to being developed to its optimal. So imagination before the ability of probably analysis and reasoning and application.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, nice. So on the on that etheric level also we can develop different kind of faculties, including imagination, which will I later on belong to the mental capacity, but then right now with the parables,
Yes.
an innate
Uh,
capacity to imagine something develops in the child. Nice. Thank you for this clarity. Um, yeah, because in fact, I had this question on what is the meaning of all that passing is but a parable, which you mentioned in your paper. So maybe that develops the real worldview for the child that this too will pass. Maybe it's a preparation for a greater philosophy. Would you say
uh,
that?
what when you said that all that is passing is but a parable, that's what Rudolf Steiner says. uh, I think he meant uh, the fact that it has to be understood as something which is a phenomenon, which is not something which is in terms of something which is how should I explain, which is not growing,
Hmm.
is not
Progressing.
it's not some, it is living, it's something which, so the whole understanding of the parable should be in terms of uh, what it implies in the sense of a deeper understanding of the growth and evolution of a human being.
So it is not just like a storytelling for no reason. It is or entertainment. It
Yes,
is
yes. The whole
education
narration is
oriented.
with a
Yeah.
certain purpose of sensitizing the child to a higher awareness of what life is all about, what values of life is all about, and how uh, I think how the divinity is kind of informed in everything in life around us. So
Right.
how the child has to be made to understand that, because he gives a beautiful example of mentioning that, talking about parable, he gives the example of how the butterfly slowly emerges out of the chrysalis, and he says you have to explain it to the child of how the human soul slowly departs from the body. So it sounds very spiritual, it sounds very high. So he says you don't have to explain in terms of what actually happens, when a person dies. It's more to make the child to understand that the most beautiful expression of that human being, is created, is likened, and the analogy is made to this butterfly. And before that, it is only a formation which is happening in the form of the
Mhm.
pupa or the chrysalis, and out of that emerges the butterfly. So I found that very beautiful and very inspiring, I'm sure, for the child as well. So this is the way he explains how a parable would operate, like would function.
Yeah, it's very interesting of how very very high philosophy he has broken it down into steps of education and how he has made the whole education the basis of the entire education system to be spiritual, and that is what in I remember in one of your talks you had made this as a basis that psychic education is what makes integral education stand apart from all the other education systems is because our approach is to ignite that psychic, which will then influence the other members of one's being. So similarly, I see you have brought out very beautifully in your paper as well that Steiner also says that, and you've compared the three principles of Sri Aurobindo's three principles of education as given by Sri Aurobindo to what Steiner says. And there also you've mentioned that the whole approach is inside out; it's not the outside in. And in your experience or having visited other schools, or if at all they're inspired by Waldorf schools, is this happening? Because there's a great role for teachers also to play in this, and you very beautifully brought that out also into your paper. But the role of the teacher, and of course, mother says the teacher has to be a yogi. That is, of course, the ultimate given to us. But how
Yes.
much is the teacher training going into it, and how much are the teachers trained to do this kind of work? Because a spiritual person only can perhaps initiate this kind of a learning education.
Yes, very true, Shruti. The Steiner insists that every teacher needs to be completely educated. I mean, informed, educated, knowledgeable about this process. So he was very particular. This whole process of anthroposophy is something which a teacher completely understands, assimilates as well. And it is only then that the teacher can do justice in being able to, educate the child in this process. And I have personally visited a Waldorf school very, very many years back. So I'm not very, I'm not able to recollect. But the very impression was something which was a very happy experience, a happy kind of feel when I stepped into that school. Where it was, I think one of the first things which made me to feel very happy was the manner in which they arranged the classroom. A lot of integration of art into the curriculum. Of how art goes very closely hand in hand with academics as such, and the whole element of music also being playing a very great role in their whole curriculum. And so the art integration is something which fascinated me. And as I said, I really did not stay for long to really know exactly how the entire curriculum kind of unfolded itself. But at the same time, yes, coming back to the question, teachers absolutely need to be kind of educated in this line. And unfortunately, it is only schools like Waldorf or our schools of integral education, those teachers or those managements of these schools who are trying to implement integral education in a very conscious way, that education by and large, as we call it, the English education, it is something purely on the level of the mental education, where not even that all the faculties are being developed, but it is per se more driven by content. So the content is what drives the whole syllabus, content overload, and what the children are supposed to remember. So even the remembering, the memory is more important rather than the processing it. And the faculty development again takes a back seat. And of course, in the schools like ours, for integral education teacher also, the mother and Sri Aurobindo have been very, very clear. The mother has been extremely, extremely particular. As you said, of course, that's the ultimate goal, that every teacher becomes a yogi. But she was very particular that every teacher is a psychologist, is a person who can understand the needs of a child, understands the nature and temperament of children. She was very, very particular about that. And the practice, to be able to guide a child in connecting with his deepest, space in himself, which the mother calls it as the psychic being, the psychic presence. It is imperative that teachers first experience to some extent, at least to begin with, to some extent, to be able to connect it with their highest person, the highest kind of space within themselves, and really start exploring and journeying towards that awareness of what the psychic being is within themselves, how that psychic being is able to is the center of the divine qualities in us. It is the center of the divine potential in us, and how that has to be recognized, how that has to be discovered, then how that needs to be developed, and then how that needs to be used, because those are the steps that we are told that the spiritual unfoldment of a child has to undergo. The fact that the child has to first discover his innate potential, the divine essence in himself, which actually makes the child unique and different from others. So first, to be able to recognize it, to discover it, to recognize it, then develop it, and then finally to put it to use. So unless the teacher has some experience in the process, I don't see how it's possible. It becomes something very mechanical, and it doesn't work. It will not work at all. So what Rudolf Steiner, again, beautifully, the way he has kind of mapped out this whole process of learning in a child's education, is really giving maximum importance to this element of the body of the eye, how that starts working itself, you know, in each of these domains, the sentient, the etheric, and the physical. How that development has to be optimized, so the working of that that divine essence of which he calls the body of the eye, of how that starts functioning and working at different levels. As I said, from upward down, which is something very interesting again. See how that kind of has its influence and that transforms, you know, that that part of the growth into something which is spiritual. I mean, for want of a better word, the regular transforms itself into the spiritual because it speaks about how this element at the body of the eye starts kindling itself, lightens itself, really illuminates itself in a sense. He also speaks about how it strengthens itself. Once it starts strengthening itself, how that starts working in all these domains, and it really transforms the child into, enables him to become an evolutionary being.
Also, through your paper, I felt that you have mentioned that. I mean, what Steiner says is that this I, which whatever he defines it as, and as in your writing you said, it's the psychic being. So, as Sri Aurobindo mentions that the psychic being grows from from being a spark, and in fact, it's very interesting that he uses the word as spark also. I mean, as Sri
Yes,
Aurobindo uses it as divine spark, he also uses it. And then he says the spark lightens up, lights the other parts of the being.
yes,
So
yes,
there's a wonderful similarity between
yes,
you, as
yes.
you rightly marked, that psychic being and the I. As you maybe for the lack of words, he could not perhaps define it as a soul or psychic being, or maybe
Because there is a footnote also. Sorry to interrupt. There's a footnote also where in his article, I don't know whether the author has said it or Steiner himself, maybe the author, who is trying to say don't take offense with the term body of the eye, because during those times they did not have any other terminology to be able to probably name it, that Steiner had to use the term body of the eye. So if people will say body means it's something physical. How can there be something physical in terms of the eye or the divine eye-ness, or that part of the intangible that Rudolf Steiner is trying to explain. So the body of the eye is, I think, for want of something better to use, he was short of words to really come up with the term in the manner in which Aurobindo and the mother coined it as a psychic being. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they were saying
no,
something.
no. I mean, in fact, do you not think that when the psychic being actually grows and when our body becomes an expression of that psychic being or is governed fully by the psychic being, then can we not say that it has become the body of the eye? Like today we say we have a soul, and tomorrow when the psychic being is fully enlightened, fully awakened, we can say the psychic being has a body. So will that terminology, the tables will turn? Do you think so?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I see where you are, from where you are drawing this point of, because Sri Aurobindo and the mother speak about that there has to be some lapse of lives probably before the psychic, the soul becomes a psychic spark and develops itself into a psychic being and a personality. And it is in that sense that you're speaking, that we can say that that time the psychic has a body in a sense. Yeah,
Yes.
in the sense of body means it's fully formed, it is fully
Yes.
developed.
So
Yes,
no, I
yes.
mean when he speaks of the body of the eye, maybe intuitively, we don't know. Maybe intuitively, that phrase could apply to
Yes,
that stage
might
of the
have been.
psychic being. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, very interesting. Yes, Shruti, that might be possible, and that is what is interesting to see how, how in this time period, both Maria Montessori and Rudolf Steiner, and there's another author by the name of Inayat Khan, also who seems to be having some similar kind of thoughts about education, and how that there's a commonality between all of them in terms of thinking of the child as a evolving soul in a sense, something similar to it. Yeah. Very interesting to find that.
Another question that comes to my mind is, like in here in Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, there are certain, like they have a limitation of how many children can be admitted every year. What is their stages of what is the age at which they can be admitted? Whereas Waldorf schools, there are thousands of Waldorf schools across the world right now, which of course they were
Sorry for
affected.
the correction, Shruti. There are not many.
No more?
Very strangely, no. Very, very few actually. Maybe max in 100 across the globe. So
Okay.
this is again an interesting point to make a note of, that yes, this is not, maybe in that sense, you see, it is elitist because
Mm.
everybody feels that this kind of uh, curriculum, that Waldorf is speaking about is something which is not real per se, which is not practical, or which is not something which would probably come as an outcome, which is more in terms of academic performances.
It's not
I guess.
utilitarian, perhaps.
Yes, it's not utilitarian. That's the right term. It is not utilitarian. It's not, the goals are not materialistic at all. So, hence, the Waldorf school is actually not many at all. I don't even think it's even 100 in the world. It's less than that.
Or maybe
So,
they've reduced, because I was reading an article where they said there are thousands of Waldorf schools which started before the Second World War, and then they faced a certain problem because of the anthroposophy itself became a controversial concept during that time. So maybe they were shut down. I'm not aware of that, but definitely
maybe. I
before the
mean,
Second
definitely
World War.
before the World War II in the 1920s, because that time there might have been more. But
Hmm.
interestingly, again, Steiner also, I think, died pretty early. And it is
Yes.
only after his death that more of Waldorf schools have emerged.
Okay.
So, not too many, but again, I guess compared to before World War II, now even there are even fewer. Yes.
Just like we are almost about to conclude this, but one thing as an educator, if one wants to know that in integral education of Sri Aurobindo and the mother and Steiner's way of educating the child, is it possible for a teacher to actually get a formal training? Because we have heard this from some learners of integral education, not the students but teachers, those who want to practice integral education, that there is no methodology which you can teach the teachers necessarily, that you should do this as a lesson plan and then implement it in the classroom. We also sometimes face this difficulty when people come and tell us what is integral education methodology. So, is this the same problem that Steiner's education system also faces, or he has a methodized system of training whoever wants to learn?
Uh, Firstly, I would like to address this question by saying I would just use the term orientation rather than training, because the distinction that I'm going to make between orientation and training is, yes, there is no method as such which can be fixed, which every teacher of integrated education should follow, and thereby being able to kind of um, use it in a school, because integral education is not a method. It is a
Mm.
whole process. It's a whole process of inner development, and inner awareness of what a child consists of, what, to become aware of what the domains of each one of us is. What are the different domains that a human being constitutes of? How do they function? How do they operate? So that unless the teacher becomes aware of all these different fields, which are working on each other, the physical, the vital, the mental, constantly influencing each other. And of course, most importantly, trying to become aware of this divine center within us, which is really what the integrated education teacher needs to slowly, slowly, at least in a very progressive way, discover it, and try to see that, that becomes the center of being able to, make the other parts within us, which is the physical, vital, and mental, to start expressing it in however little a manner, but definitely try to get in touch with it, so that the divine qualities, the divine potential is being able to be used through these instruments. So
Mm.
all this awareness has to be given to teachers. So
Mm.
this is what I mean by orientation. But then, when once the orientation is, kind of uh, extended to the teachers, how to actually translate that awareness into a kind of pedagogical engagement or a task is something which should be left to the teacher to do, because each teacher, there is the method cannot be copied, and there cannot be a same method for every teacher, because
Hmm.
then it would defeat the very philosophy of integrated education, which believes in the uniqueness of every child and thereby a uniqueness of every teacher to be able to connect with that divine element and to be able to manifest it in her or his own unique way. So the implementation of it has to be something which is individual, which cannot be put into a box of a method. But in the case of Rudolf Steiner, I do not want to comment because I'm not very sure about this. But according to me, yes, there is not only an orientation but a training also which takes place, because that entire rolling out of the curriculum is far more structured. It has certain procedures, certain methods which are very clearly laid out. So I am assuming that because it is already in the written form, that teachers are expected to go through it and stick and stand by everything which has been written out. So there the term training would come in and be more applicable, rather than the training term being applicable to the integral education teacher. But nevertheless, a total, as far as possible, a very a, a constant and a deep orientation of what the vision of integral education is something which teachers have to be kind of exposed to, without which it will not be possible for any teacher to walk into an integral education school which is practicing sincerely, trying to implement to whatever extent the vision of integral education. It will not be possible to be done.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying this, because it's a pertinent question that people who look forward to integral education always look for, and this is very nice, this distinction between orientation and training, because yes,
Training.
you can orient people about integral education. Now, just coming to our last question, in case, because you mentioned a lot of similarities between Sri Aurobindo and Steiner, there's any marked difference that you see in their educational, the concept of education, or the theory of education, anything, any marked difference there?
Um, I would just say that Rudolf Steiner has, uh, he has again made it maybe too specific in terms of how the body of the eye, or when we are saying the similarity of the psychic being, in his framework of education, he has made it, uh, he has kind of given an explanation which is already very, very pronounced. It is something which he already speaks about in the manner in which it is supposed to be, working in these different fields. But I don't think it works in that way, because I think, and what I understand about what Aurobindo and mother say about psychic being is something which has to be very personally discovered. It has to be a personal journey, and one cannot make it too very, kind of rigid, or too structured. Again, to for interpret, one cannot structure it and put into a timetable or a schedule in terms of age or in terms of. So I think in the excitement of what Rudolf Steiner experienced, which is again a very very laudable, kind of something which really need to appreciate of how this person comes so close to his own understanding of what spiritual growth is all about in children. So I think in his excitement, he wanted to give it some. That's what, see, that is where he is a scientist. Not that Aurobindo was not a scientist; he was a spiritual scientist as well. Of the greatest measure, because we see Aurobindo being so comfortable and mapping out every detail about the
Yes.
entire geography of the spiritual experience of a human individual, from the lowest to the highest. But here, more on an external terminology, to use that in terms of a scientist, because I think he got stuck with the use of these frameworks, which became very structured and which became very much connected to age and, the time frame of what the growth of a child would be. That I feel is a big difference. I think Sri Aurobindo and the mother leave it more to a spontaneous discovery, more a spontaneous, you know, journey towards being able to walk the sunlit path. It is something more personalized.
Yes,
And
and you use
here
a very beautiful term that it's an organic growth for a.
it's an organic growth. Yes, that's what I use. It's more organic. So, because we understand that a human being is not something which can be put into a box of trying to fix everything in terms of growth. Growth itself is dynamic. It is
Yes,
itself, the moment we speak about the human growth, it is organic. It is something which is more natural, and it will be different from person to person.
right.
So for me, that is the essential difference. So that's what this is more a structure. The interior education, I can say, it is more a process.
Open-ended, progressive.
Of
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for giving clarifications and enlightening us more about Sri Aurobindo's integral education and Rudolf Steiner's method of education. And of course, even in your paper, as in your this talk, you have clarified in great details of how they come so close, not only being contemporaries almost, but in their vision of education and in their vision of educating a child and a stage-wise development of a child and the levels of beings of a child which a teacher needs to be aware of, parents need to be aware of. So a very beautiful comparison, and thank you so much for
Thank you. Thank you
doing
for
such a
having me.
wonderful research on this subject. And we hope that people who are interested in education would go back perhaps to Sri Aurobindo and to Steiner and learn from both to be able to implement it in their way of teaching the children. So thank you so much, Dr. Chhalamayi Reddy, for being with us and being with SACAR, doing this intensive research and giving this interview to SACAR as well. So thank you
Thank you
so much.
so much, Shruti. Thank you, Sakar, again for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.